In this Diablo 4 video, I'll be helping you understand how the Sorcerer class is changing with patch 2.0, which is releasing alongside the Vessel of Hatred expansion on October 8th, and to give you an easy overview of what to expect for your builds and gameplay. The short and sweet of it is that patch 2.0 is adding a new Conjuration skill and 5 passives, while diversifying how you play as Sorcerer by helping you pick between single element focus or elementalist approaches. Familiar and Enlightenment aim to incentivize multiple element players, while the other skills focus on survivability, cooldown reduction, and single element damage. Before we get into the specifics of the new Sorcerer in Diablo 4 though, let me tell you about some huge changes coming to the game itself. I'll try to keep these as brief as possible, and we'll have full detailed coverage of all these changes in a future video, but for now, let me tell you about the most important ones. First of all, max level has been reduced to 60 from 100, and players will begin receiving Paragon points once they reach this level. These points can be used by any level 60 character on your account. This not only means that you can gain Paragon points for your Sorcerer while playing on your Necromancer, for example, it also means that you'll have an additional 10 skill points to allocate into your build from levels 51 to 60, for a total of 69 skill points in patch 2.0, up from 59 before. Additionally, stats like armor, health, and damage have been drastically reduced in order to simplify the game and make mathing easier for players. This doesn't result in a nerfing of your character, it's more of a back-end change that is reflecting in new numbers in your UI. Don't freak out if you see your weapon no longer deals the same damage, it will still be as effective as it was before. And lastly, the difficulty system of Diablo 4 is changing, and there are now new torment levels along with new difficulty levels, much like there were in Diablo 3. Regular difficulty levels will be unlocked by advancing your character, but torment levels will need to be unlocked through an endgame activity called the Pit of Artificers, which is much like Rifts in Diablo 3, which are randomized dungeons essentially with a boss at the end. This shouldn't change the way you play the game fundamentally, and hopefully allows players to customize their preferred difficulty a bit better. Now moving on to the specific changes for the Sorcerer. In a game where skill synergy is everything, the addition of a new skill can be very impactful. For the Sorcerer, our new active skill is called Familiar, and it's a Conjuration skill with 3 charges and a default 12-second cooldown. Your Familiar is an entity made of the element of the last skill you cast and will float around to enemies and explode for 40% of that element's damage for 8 seconds. Since you can have up to 6 Familiars active at a time, this is a very intriguing proposition for a multi-element build, as you could benefit from the elemental damage spread and get the benefits for each element. Fire will give 94% burning damage over 4 seconds, Cold will apply 15% chill, and Lightning will stun for 1 second. This skill can be enhanced into ignoring your previously cast skill and simply rotating through the elements, and giving you 3% damage reduction when 2 Familiars are active, or it can be used so that the active Familiar gives you 10% damage of that type. So for example, a Lightning Familiar would increase your lightning damage by 10%. While this new skill is definitely aimed at making Elementalist type builds more interesting, there can be some very unique applications if you're wanting to specialize in an element as well, so it can add new options to all playstyles. The Familiar enchantment gives you a 25% chance to spawn a Familiar of a matching element every time you summon any other conjuration. So for example, when you cast Hydra, you could get a Fire Familiar. There are some really exciting synergies for this Familiar and Conjuration builds that I think will create a new way to play the Sorcerer, and the first thing to pair it with is the new key passive. The new passive skills are also very interesting and intend to make your gameplay faster and more versatile. The key passive is called Enlightenment and is, in my opinion, heavily geared toward multi-element sorcerers, and will be a fantastic addition for familiar conjurers. When you first look at this key passive, it might sound very convoluted, so you need to math this out to what it means for your gameplay. If you spam skills and try to work on a rotation, you can probably get the required stacks in about 10 seconds, and then you will enjoy 10 seconds of Enlightened status, giving you 50% uptime of the buff. However, given how the community generally approaches Sorcerer builds, it's more likely we're going to see some autocast or external source used to build up synergy with an item to maximize performance and obtain 100% uptime, rather than focusing on the rotation mechanics of getting this buff and keeping it. All in all, it's an intriguing skill, and I'll have to see how it actually plays with the itemization. I'll go in more in depth into how these new skills and gear all come together to almost give you a build right away in the final section of this video, so you can use the chapters to navigate there or keep watching to understand everything else first. The other general passives are probably a lot easier to apply. Evocation, for example, is a new skill that reduces all cooldowns by 4, 8, and 12%, and this is always welcome on Sorc builds that want to spam specific OP ultimates. Next up is Energy Focus that generates a 6-second barrier for a very small percentage of your max life every second, up to 30% of your max life, for so long as you don't lose health. I'm quite confident this one will fit right in with the kind of crazy numbers we've been seeing for Chain Lightning Mythicals. Another new defensive skill is Dampen Layer that gives you 2, 4, and 6% damage reduction while you have an active barrier, most likely to be mixed with the previous passive to maximize Sorc survivability. And lastly, there's Elemental Synergies, which makes Frost, Shock, and Pyromancy skills deal 1, 2, or 3% increased damage for each skill you have equipped of their type. This is mostly beneficial to specialized single element builds that can be quite a rarity in the meta world, although I personally really like them. The Sorcerer class has changed a lot since Diablo 4's release, so if you're returning Sorcerer after a long absence, it's very likely that the build you were using is no longer viable, and you need to reconsider your skill allocation and gear. There has been a huge amount of changes ranging from minimal to massive to each elemental specialization. As a quick example, Flickering Arc Lash used to give you 6% movement speed for 5 seconds per enemy hit, up to 18%. It was a skill focused on building the move fast lightning sorcerer that would run, stun, and increase its attack speed and damage from those buffs. This playstyle has been mostly reworked, and this skill now has a completely different effect, granting 5 mana if your swipe hits at least one enemy, or you hit 3 or more enemies or a boss. The next swipe also deals 50% more damage. But it would be pointless and long to run you through the entire laundry list of skill changes from launch to today, so the highlights for the returning sorcerer are mainly that Ice is out as meta, being probably the most nerfed elemental line given its extensive overuse during the first months of the game. Hydra Sorcs also went out of fashion for a while, and right now the Sorc meta is all about Chain Lightning, Lightning Orbs, or Fireball. The reason for this is not always the changes to skills, but that the itemization makes synergies of these elements and casting skewed, and you end up benefiting a lot more from these specific items reacting to each other than you do from trying to work with the skill trees themselves. Fast forward to the changes being made to the current game by patch 2.0, or the Vessel of Hatred expansion, and you can see there are some attempts to rebalance lightning and fire, encouraging multi-elemental builds, and improve some of the lesser used skills on fire and lightning lines. There are 0 changes to ice and frost skills, so that tells you a lot about where the devs are in terms of ice shard spam. Since there have been many subtle changes to skills over the year the game has been out, my recommendation for any returning player with a big gap in updates is to have a look at our build selection and pick something built around skills, easily obtainable items, and Paragon boards first, as the many builds that you see doing a trillion DPS require an investment of time to develop that would probably get in the way of you enjoying the normal expansion content, and will probably be different by the time you get to endgame anyway. Moving along to Paragon boards and Glyphs. In 2.0, players will also now only be able to equip 5 Paragon boards at a time, including your base board, so you cannot just ninja through a board for one node and out really quickly, and instead players will need to utilize their boards wisely. However, each class has gained a new board for a total of 9 boards, up from 8, and some rare nodes have changed. And on top of that, players can now earn a total of 300 Paragon points, up from 200, which should allow for a serious power increase across all builds. Glyphs have also seen a significant change. They now no longer improve via experience, but instead level up by completing levels of the Pit of Artificers and trying to improve them at the end, again, much like Diablo 3. The higher level of Pit you complete, the higher chance you have of improving your Glyph. Glyphs also now go up to level 100, further expanding their power, and the higher level they are, the more difficult it becomes to improve them without going to higher and higher levels of the Pit of Artificers. The new Sorcerer Paragon board is the fundamental release board. Now this is very interesting to me because when it was first shown with the 2.0 patch notes, the legendary node was very different than it is during the PTR testing. This means that the Sorcerer optimization is still in flux, and developers want to encourage multi-elemental play, but are running into problems as they also need to add things that everyone can be tempted to use. If you look at them side by side, you can notice the significant difference, as the first one was outright elemental attacks, and the new one is off applicable effects. The rest of the rare nodes align with the current description better, giving you extra bonuses for triggering these effects. In general, this board is standard with quite a few magic nodes and versatile glyph slots that have both dex and magic around to give you options for the most popular glyphs. However, looking at it simply before considering gear, this board is not really game-changing for the Sorc, and it will simply be another optional tool in diversification arsenal as the Sorc continues to be a very gear-based class. That said, I can see this specific board working well with the new skills, as again, it encourages multi-element builds. Next, we'll be taking a look at Sorcerer uniques and aspects. Remember that the Codex of Power was changed in Season 4 and now stores legendary aspects of the highest roll you've obtained for that particular aspect. You can also use the Codex of Power as many times as you want on items provided you have the golden materials. If you've not played in a while, you should probably head over to your storage, pull items you've been saving for a rainy day, and salvage many of them as soon as possible at the blacksmith in order to unlock higher rolls at the Codex of Power and free up valuable inventory space. There have been some changes to 3 specific sorcerer aspects, and they are rather straightforward. The first is aiming to balance barriers and narrow the use of this aspect to ice armor and encourage freezing. The second is changing how burning damage is dealt over time, and the third one is simply making Armageddon better, which is good news for me because I do love me an Infinite Meteor build. Existing unique items have also been changed to match the new and improved cast a skill of X damage rather than deal X damage type. Kalrasha, for example, will now synergize with the new key passive a lot better. Axial Conduit seems to be completely reworked, and Gloves of the Illuminator got a grammar fix. In addition to changes, there are also new legendary aspects, mythics, and uniques for the Sorcerer that have me very excited. First, I want to show you the legendary aspects. Since the Sorcerer's 2.0 flavor seems to be all about elemental mix-ups, I think Elemental Constellation is the most intriguing of the additions, particularly when we think about how this may interact with a min-maxed multi-element conjuration build that is constantly spamming summons of all 3 elements. The unique item added with 2.0 is also focused on the familiar skill and will make those builds even more powerful, so let's take a look at that. If you're watching so far and a super conjuration build is already brewing in your head, just know that you are not alone. In addition to everything you've seen so far, there are of course new mythic items and the all-new rune words that will create new and intriguing combinations with whatever extra gear there's yet to uncover in the game. Rune words themselves are deserving of their own video, so we'll have something explaining this in depth in another video. But for now, let's just put it out there that this is also an important part of your Sorc building, and will probably change how you approach gameplay in general. Do note, however, that rune words are only available to Vessel of Hatred expansion purchasers, and you will not be able to use rune words playing on 2.0 unless you own the expansion. So what does this all mean for the Sorcerer? The Sorcerer has always been one of my favorite Diablo classes to play, and I even tried remaking the classic Fire and Frozen Orb thematic builds from Diablo 2 during our Diablo 4 launch coverage. If you're like me and you like experimenting with specialized builds and want to get the most out of a theme, these changes bring a very fresh approach to Sorcerer building if we're all willing to commit to the Conjuration school and go all out with elemental variety. It would seem the easiest way to optimize around the new key passive would be to pair it with a familiar enchantment and create a Conjuration-focused Sorcerer, doing a multi-element chain of summons that keeps spawning familiars and giving you all those bonuses, while using aspects to boost Hydra and Conjurations in general. Think of something like Spark plus Hydra spam that triggers Cold Orbs for a 3-element rotation leading to 100% uptime, and this synergizes very well with the Paragon Board Legendary if we optimize it. Now to that, we can add the new legendary aspect to summon elemental daggers and add the unique gloves to further boost familiar damage, and you have a theoretical powerhouse of elemental mayhem that should allow you to play a much more versatile sorcerer than we have before. This is a very good thing for the Sorcerer class, as we seem to be stuck going from one element to the next and focusing on one single skill to pop crazy damage, but it would be fantastic to see Fire, Frost, and Lightning live up to their max potential in one to rule them all type of builds. So that rounds out our introduction to the Sorcerer 2.0. I'm very excited to jump into the new expansion and to see just how different my Sorcerer can be, and we'll be starting with Conjuration, but surely exploring other maybe less obvious, but equally exciting builds that new content brings. As always, you can find our builds on the blog at Fextralife, and make sure to use our interactive map and wiki to keep track of where to get all items. We've already been working and the expansion content is shaping up nicely, and we will have other videos for the other classes coming over the next couple days as well, so stay tuned for those. Will you be playing Sorcerer at the 2.0 launch in October, or are you going to be playing the Spiritborn class? What do you think of the changes? Are they good or not? Let me know in the comments below.